The spring of 2014. Colchester in the United Kingdom is the oldest recorded town in Britain. Now a busy and vibrant city, it is packed with history, amazing architecture, museums, and is loved by tourists, students, and its almost 150,000 residents alike. In 2014, one of those residents was a father of 5, 33-year-old James Attfield. Known to everyone as Jim, he was described as a harmless, friendly, and always jovial person who loved any chance to get on the karaoke machine. He had been on a mission to rebuild his life after being hit by a car 4 years earlier, which had left him in a coma for 8 weeks. When he came out of it, he had brain damage, severe mobility issues, and his whole life was suddenly very different. Ever a positive person, he was finally coming to terms with this profound change, and had pushed himself really hard in terms of rehabilitation. He moved into semi-sheltered accommodation in Colchester. He was getting back to everything he loved and gaining his independence too. After he suffered his brain injury, Jim was left with no memory of his children. In just a few days' time, he was set to have an emotional reunion with them after arranging it with his ex-partner Cheryl. It had been several years of him not having any idea who they were, something very painful for everyone. But with the work he had done and the time that had passed, to say he and Cheryl were excited for him to be seeing them all again was an understatement. On Friday the 28th of March 2014, Jim spent the evening having some drinks at one of his local bars, the River Lodge pub, arriving there just before 6 p.m. He left sometime before 1 a.m. and made his way to Castle Park, a short cut through to his home. He lay down on the grass and started to fall asleep when a man came across him and asked him if he was all right. Jim replied that yes, he was. He was drunk, but he was just stopping for a minute, sobering up and having a cigarette. The man shouted, "You want to be careful, mate," before continuing on down the path. At 5:45 a.m, emergency services were called to Castle Park. A resident had found Jim on the grass, covered in blood, and barely clinging to life. He managed to fight for another 45 minutes before being pronounced dead just as he reached the hospital. Police said seeing how badly he had been attacked was really jarring to them. One officer said that Jim was so covered in blood he could not initially determine his skin or hair colour. It was just a sea of red. A bloody shoe print was found about a metre away from his body, and more footprints were found past that point, showing the direction his killer or killers went in. An autopsy confirmed that Jim had been stabbed a shocking 102 times all over his body, including his head and in his eye. He was covered in wounds on his hands and arms, showing he had fought his killer back and tried to defend himself. The only person that appeared to have seen or interacted with him was the witness from around 1 a.m, but he was ruled out as being involved. So they knew the killing had to have happened between 1 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. It was not only a fair few hours, but it was early in the morning in a pitch-black park, surrounded by bushes and trees. The investigating team's work was already very much cut out for them. CCTV from the River Lodge pub showed Jim taking off his jacket and sitting down at the bar alone, exchanging a few words with the employees working. Nothing seemed wrong or out of place. It looked like a fairly standard Friday night. When he left, no one followed him out, so it looked unlikely that his killer had been in there with him. It really had been a totally random attack. His mom said he was such a kind person. He would never have picked a fight with anyone or caused himself any trouble. He was not confrontational in the slightest. Investigators did have access to another camera near one of the entrances to Castle Park, which showed several people coming and going from late in the evening until 4:20 a.m. These images were given to the media and the police implored all 23 people on the footage to come forward. They hoped at best someone would remember seeing something, but at the very least they could clear their names.
Not far from a school playground, a search for a murder weapon. A knife used to stab this man, James Attfield, 102 times. He was found fatally injured near Castle Park in Colchester early on Saturday morning, victim of a seemingly motiveless, frenzied, vicious attack. Detectives say they have no leads. They admit they're baffled. Meanwhile, we're learning more about James Attfield, described as shy and polite. 4 years ago, he had a car accident which left him with a brain injury that affected his reasoning and speech. He avoided busy pubs and had few friends his own age, and his relatively solitary lifestyle makes this investigation even more difficult for the police. Today, Chief Superintendent Carl O'Malley gave interview after interview after interview, repeated appeals for public help to catch the killer or killers.
I don't think that there is any clear motive for what has happened to James, and we would appeal to anybody who knows anything about this terrible murder to come forward and speak to the police.
The Castle Park area is used all hours of the day and night. And I'm sure that someone would have seen someone there acting suspiciously in the park. If anyone has any information, then I urge them to contact the police. Thank you.
Uniformed officers in the area were increased, with reinforcements from all over East Anglia and the Metropolitan Police. Around 3,000 personal alarms were handed out to people who felt scared and vulnerable. Everyone was on edge.
Father stabbed 102 times in his local park.
The popular UK TV show Crime Watch talked about Jim's case in an episode, hoping to generate some leads. But sadly it didn't. And 3 months later, as the investigation into who killed Jim was still ongoing, and just as it felt like everything in the community was settling back down, a second body was found in eerily similar circumstances. 31-year-old Nahid Almanea had been doing her PhD at the University of Essex. On the morning of Tuesday the 17th of June 2014, she had packed up her coursework and set off from her student accommodation to her campus for a lecture. She had been thriving in her studies and was throwing herself into university life. At 10:30 a.m, she was going along the Salary Brook Trail, a quiet but much quicker route to her building, often filled with people walking their dogs or fellow students doing the same thing as her. About 10 minutes later, a man living nearby was out searching for his missing cat when he and his friend walked right into her body on the ground. He described her face as being smashed to bits, with one eye hanging out of the socket and the other badly swollen. Paramedics and police officers were there within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. She had clearly been followed and approached from behind, stabbed repeatedly in the back, and at barely 5 foot tall, she was instantly overpowered by her killer. She had wounds to her front and, the same as Jim, she had been stabbed in both eyes. She had fallen to the floor with such force that her skull was cracked too.
The current investigation is focused around the murder of Nahid Almanea. Nahid was a young lady from Saudi Arabia who was studying here in the UK, living in Woodrow Way here in Colchester and studying at Essex University. We know that she left her home address as she went to the area of Hunswick Road and to the shop and past the shops there, the parade of shops, around 10:20 on Tuesday morning. At 10:40 a.m. we received calls from members of the public to say that Nahid's body had been discovered very close to where we are now here on the Salary Brook Trail. I'd ask anybody who was in the area of Hunswick Road at 10:20 a.m. or thereabouts to come forward and speak to us. We know from the CCTV footage there that there were people in that area in that time, and they are yet to come forwards to us. In addition to that, I'd ask everybody who lives on the Greenstead estate to think about searching their gardens, their bins and any outbuildings. We're specifically looking for any items that have been discarded there, whether it be blood-stained clothing, whether it be weapons or anything else that's been left behind. If it has, then please contact us. We're keen to seize those items and to deal with those items appropriately. Finally, I'd say we're absolutely certain that the answer to this truly terrible crime lies here within the Colchester community.
In total, she had 16 stab wounds, 2 of which would have proved fatal on their own. They determined the blade was around 10 inches. Nahid had only lived in Britain since the start of the year, moving from Saudi Arabia to Colchester to live with her brother, who was also studying. She was enjoying her English language course as part of her PhD and was due to graduate in August. She regularly took the same route to her campus with her brother, along the secluded footpath she was found on. However, on Tuesdays, her brother started lectures early, meaning she would walk in alone. Richard Barnard, head of the university's International Academy, paid tribute to her, saying she was a very hard-working, quiet and conscientious student. Her brother said everyone back home was crippled with grief, and her funeral was huge. She had been wearing her traditional Islamic clothing, and detectives also said they were potentially looking into it as being a racially or religiously motivated murder. A fellow student said he didn't believe her murder was a hate crime, but he said he was concerned about a potential serial killer in the area if the attack was linked to the killing of Jim. It could be wrong place, wrong time. If you consider the two cases, it's not an extremist or racist person. It seems like a gang or a serial killer or a psychopath going around, he said. It was hard to know if her murder was connected to Jim from 3 months earlier, but police said they weren't ruling it out.
Officers from across the east of England are now involved in the murder hunt. Police are still searching around the footpath in Colchester where Nahid Almanea was found on Tuesday morning. No weapon has yet been found. Just 3 months ago, a father of 5, James Attfield, was also stabbed to death in a Colchester park. Detectives admit they could both have been victims of the same killer.
There are significant similarities between both offences. Both were committed in open spaces that weren't widely used, and both victims died as a result of knife attacks. On that basis, it is an active line of inquiry for us to consider whether or not they're linked. But at this time, the advice and support we've received from the National Crime Agency, together with the expertise that we have here within Essex Police, indicates that we cannot yet safely assume that they are connected.
And it just goes to prove with this latest murder, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, where you are. So everybody's got to be so much more vigilant, not just for their own safety, but they've got to be aware for the safety of other people around them, because obviously for, these murderers to be caught, I think a lot of it's going to depend on information coming from the public. So just everybody has got to be so much more aware of everything and not just look out for themselves, but look out for each other.
It's been pretty much 3 months since Jim was murdered. Police still don't know the motive. Now they say potentially whoever killed Jim may have killed someone else. Do you have faith in the police investigation?
Oh, totally. Yes, totally. I mean, I know they're not leaving any stone unturned. Every bit of information they get, any bit of evidence about anything they find, is thoroughly looked at. So, yeah, I have every faith that the police will catch, the people responsible for Jim, for this lady, be it the same or not. It will in time, it's just when.
DCS Warren of Essex Police said that there were obvious similarities between the murders. It is extremely unusual to see an attack of this type. We remain open-minded as to the profile of the offender or offenders, and we remain open-minded as to whether or not the 2 murder investigations would be linked, he said. He added that they were being treated as separate but parallel investigations. Different to Jim's case, however, at least this time they had a few witnesses. A couple of people saw a young man running away from the scene at about 10:56 a.m, and off the back of this, an EFIT was released along with a description. A young Caucasian male, roughly aged between 18 and 25, medium build, dark hair. He was wearing a red long-sleeve jacket with the hood up and dark trousers. After more tip-offs, they released a picture of a yellowy tan-coloured jacket and the grey, yellow and black bag Nahid was carrying that day.
Today I'm able to reveal that we are seeking to identify a man who was seen within the area here of the Salary Brook Trail, and he was wearing what can only be described as a distinctive jacket. The male is described as being in his late teens to 30 years of age. He had thick, dark hair, which is described as mop-like on top, perhaps 2 to 3 inches tall. He was clean-shaven, of average build and of tanned appearance, not wearing any glasses. As I say, the jacket that you can see here is similar to the jacket that he was wearing, and he was seen on the Salary Brook Trail walking back towards the Greenstead estate from the direction of the university.
More than 100 police officers from Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Kent, Norfolk and Suffolk were now involved in the investigation, as well as profilers from the National Crime Agency. Crime Stoppers was also offering a reward of up to £20,000 to anyone who provided useful information. The home Nahid once shared with her brother was turned upside down, neighbours were questioned, and almost 300 doors were knocked on. A 52-year-old man was arrested in connection with her murder, but was quickly released. and 2 weeks later police spoke to a 15-year-old as well. He was one of 70 people questioned that had a history of knife crime. The 15-year-old was a pupil at Colchester Academy. He was subject to a youth court supervision order for robbing a shop at knife point in January 2014 and had been convicted of the criminal damage of a house in 2013. He was interviewed alongside his mother but said he was at home at the time of the killing. He was not questioned further, and they were back at square one. Almost a year would pass and police had interviewed more than 900 people, but the investigations were slow with little movement. They hadn't found any murder weapons, any items of clothing, or frankly, any clues at all, despite spending months combing through every inch of those wooded areas and rivers. There was such little forensic or physical evidence from the crime scenes, it seemed likely that the killer had been wearing gloves, and despite the frenzied nature of the attacks, the killer had been very careful to cover their tracks. Finally, on May 26, 2015, 999 answered the phone to Michelle Sadler. Michelle had been walking her dog near the Salary Brook Trail, the same place Nahid had been found. She alerted the police after she became concerned about someone's suspicious behaviour. At around 10:30 a.m, she had locked eyes with a teenage boy, standing alone on a small wooden footbridge over the stream. He was looking around intently, staring and being shifty. She instantly felt intimidated by him, and the more she watched, the more panicked she got. He was wearing a yellowy tan-coloured jacket and had thick, dark-rimmed glasses and was wearing what looked like gardening gloves. She turned around and hurried back down the path where she bumped into another lady. They decided to go back together to see if he was still there. He was no longer on the bridge. Instead, he was lurking under a tree, crouching and peering around. Michelle called 999 and said, "Hi, I wonder if you can help me. There's a very suspicious guy who's just standing around there, and it's like obviously a dog trail, and he's just on his own, and it's quite a secluded area. He's got like I don't know, I could be wrong, but he's got a jacket that looks very similar to what was all over the paper and everything, and it's on the same trail as what happened almost a year ago. I don't know, it's just, something's not right." Just 10 minutes later, PC Loomis, who was in the area, approached the teen and asked him if everything was good. He told the officers he was just out for a walk to clear his head, saying he didn't feel quite right. PC Loomis noticed the gloves and the thick jacket, which on a hot day was a little odd. He asked him if he had anything in his possession that he needed to know about. The boy admitted he had a large flip knife on him. He was taken into custody. The teenager was 16-year-old James Fairweather, the same teenager they had interviewed just 2 weeks after Nahid was killed. The then 15-year-old boy they had released without further question after he said he was at home at the time of the murder.
Within hours of the latest killing, a 52-year-old man was arrested but later released. Yesterday, a teenager was picked up.
Police just wanted to know about the knife, but in his interview, he admitted to more than they ever could have expected. James Fairweather was Jim and Nahid's killer, and they had no idea they had already interviewed a double murderer and watched him walk away. He spoke calmly and candidly about voices in his head telling him to kill people. A dive into James's devices showed he had an obsession with serial killers, especially the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and Ted Bundy, whom he kept photos of on his phone. He said he was turned on by reading about them and spent ages researching people like Ian Huntley and Myra Hindley too. He also looked up a report into a man who had killed several elderly victims and had entered a diminished responsibility plea, so it appeared he had already been planning how he would handle this if he got caught. James said that on the night of the 28th of March, as his parents slept, the voices were getting louder and overpowering him. He grabbed a large knife, put on some gloves, and crept out of his house through a downstairs window. He was now on the hunt for someone to kill. He wanted to turn his twisted fantasies into a deadly reality. He walked around for a while before going into Castle Park, about a mile from his house. He came across Jim Attfield on the grass. He said he paused for a minute, watching to see if he stirred, but he was lying on his back, passed out. James said he was on a mission from the devil and launched his attack.
because my voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it. And I saw him. It was laying on the grass, like that. It was like that, just fast asleep, where he was drunk. Then he goes, he's the one. Do it. So I went up to him. Can I stand up?
Yes.
Went up to him. Stood over like that. Not helping that. So I stabbed him first there. And I'd done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing louder.
He said he went into a rage and only came out of it when he heard Jim making a gurgling sound and realised he was dying. He then saw a light coming from somewhere, and fearing someone was about to find him, he ran back home, getting in at around 2:30 a.m. Given the time they found Jim, this meant he had been fighting for his life for at least 3 hours. Given his appalling injuries, this is something really hard to think about. James washed the knife before throwing it into the river the next day and putting his blood-stained clothes in a bin bag and leaving it outside to be collected with the rest of the street's rubbish. It was a much similar story for how he came to attack and murder Nahid. He said when he saw her, he heard a voice in his head saying, "They shall not see evil." James said he specifically turned her around and knocked her sunglasses off so he could stab her in the eye. He coldly added that she would have been safe if she hadn't decided to walk there alone. Why would she ever do that knowing a murderer was on the loose, he said. In the 11 months before he was arrested, James said he thought about killing someone else every day. The voices in his head were telling him to rape someone, burn babies, pull sex workers' tongues out, and throw acid in his head teacher's face. He said to help stop the voices, he would fill up his day with watching violent pornography and playing video games. He admitted he only laid low because he knew the police were all over everything, not because he had wanted to stop killing. James felt a bit sad about the murders, but said it was the right thing to do. They committed sins. He also got such a thrill from watching it play out in the media and was constantly searching for updates and putting cuttings from the newspaper into a plastic folder. It was a stark confession, and James Fairweather was arrested and charged with murder. Due to his age, he was not named, and while the court proceedings got underway, James was placed in a secure hospital undergoing evaluations. James and his defence team were arguing that he was suffering from psychosis. James said he was not in his own body or mind, and that the voices in his head had taken over. It was all out of his control. This was until he was confronted by the DNA evidence linking him, and he finally acknowledged some responsibility for the killings. James Fairweather pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, but still denied both counts of murder. The prosecution immediately rejected this, and a murder trial date was set.
There was clear medical evidence in terms of that indicated that he knew that his actions were wrong and that he had control, sufficient control to be able to prevent himself from committing 2 such horrendous crimes. And it's on that basis that we'd rejected the offer to plead to manslaughter and determined that we would proceed to a trial for murder.
It is particularly rare for a 15-year-old to commit these kind of crimes.
Incredibly rare, and I think the public as a whole will be shocked and surprised that somebody so young could carry out 2 such horrendous murders. But in terms of the body of evidence that's been presented to a court, and a jury are satisfied beyond all reasonable doubt that he is guilty of the offence of murder of both Jim and Nahid.
The questions have been asked about whether he could have been caught earlier, because he actually was interviewed. He lived near to the Salary Brook Trail. Did you miss opportunities to actually get him sooner?
He was one of nearly 300 people who were interviewed in relation to Jim and Nahid's murder, but at no point was he ever eliminated from the investigation. I'm absolutely confident that all of the evidence that was available was considered, and it was only in terms of in May of last year that there was sufficient evidence in terms of to be able with confidence to say that he was responsible for both murders.
After countless evaluations from many experts, his defence team said that 4 psychiatrists agreed that he was on the autistic spectrum. His lawyer said that James was a 15-year-old boy caught up in what I want to describe as the perfect storm of autism, increasing isolation and paranoia, leading to the psychosis which led him to kill. But the judge shut this down right away, saying this would not in any way work as a complete defence. He said many people of all ages have autism. It would be an unfair and unjustified slur on them to suggest that autism predisposes someone to commit acts of serious violence. The judge added that the murders were sadistic and horrific in ways hard to process. James described being bullied at school because of his ears and his glasses. He struggled with his work due to dyslexia and never recovered from the death of his grandmother. Sources from the school said his behaviour had become increasingly violent as he got older, calling him a thug who kicked and headbutted other pupils. The prosecution were allowed to use their own experts to assess him too. Dr. Philip Joseph told the court that the claims were like something you might see in a horror film. Every time he's talking about voices, he's doing it to distance himself from what he's done. He found no evidence of psychosis. Dr. Joseph described James's auditory and visual hallucinations as extremely unconvincing. James would change where the voices were coming from. Sometimes they were internal, sometimes external. No story had been consistent. Dr. Joseph also referred back to James's police interview, an interview which showed him clearly and calmly laying everything out that had happened without hesitation. He could not only remember everything, but there was an obvious premeditation there with both murders, as opposed to an out-of-body compulsion. Another psychiatrist testified that James had told him some of the most antisocial and violent thoughts they had ever heard in all of their career. The now 17-year-old was found unanimously guilty in April 2016, and because of his age, this would also give him an automatic minimum sentence of 12 years. His name was also finally released. Upon deciding the sentence, the judge said, "I turn to the mitigating factors. There are potentially two. The first is that you suffered from a mental disorder or mental disability which, although not affording you a defence of diminished responsibility, lowered your degree of culpability. Your autism was not diagnosed until you had been transferred to the Medium Secure Hospital, where you have continued to remain a patient. I accept that your autism would have contributed to your obsessive behaviour, which to an extent may have helped feed your obsession with serial killers. In my judgment, the combination of autism and the emerging psychopathic personality disorder from which you were suffering cannot be said to have reduced your culpability to any significant degree, although I take it into account. The second mitigating factor is your age. You were aged 15 years and 7 months at the time of the first murder, and 15 years and 10 months at the time of the second. Your age is, of course, to an extent taken into account already in the starting point of 12 years. However, it can fairly be said that your age is in the lower end of the range between 14 and 18 years, 14 being the generally accepted age of criminal responsibility. It is too early to say how your emerging psychopathic personality disorder will develop. You have the support of a loving and caring family. Your mother was present throughout the trial. Both she and your father are here in court today. For your family too, this case is a tragedy." With this, he handed James Fairweather 2 life sentences, with a minimum term of 27 years. If he is ever released, he will be on licence for the rest of his life, meaning he would be subject to terms and conditions and could be recalled to prison at any time, should those terms and conditions not be adhered to. James did not react at all, but his mother sat and cried as he was led away. He turned around briefly, shrugged and mouthed, "Don't give a shit."
This is a statement from Jim Attfield's mother, Judy Finch, who is standing next to me. "We are grateful for today's verdict and hope now justice has been served, we can begin to move on as a family. On March 29, 2014, our lives were changed forever when my kind and brave son Jim was brutally killed. He had been through so much already, having fought hard to overcome the effects of brain damage suffered when he was struck by a car. He didn't deserve to die. At the time, we had no idea the killer was so young, a fact that makes my son's death feel all the more cruel and unnecessary. James Fairweather is a monster in our eyes, and we will never be able to forgive him. I would like to thank all the police I've had contact with for all their hard work and sensitivity. Also, I would like to thank the media who have supported us during the investigation, keeping Jim's case in the public eye and helping the police with the appeals for information. Journalists have shown us great sensitivity throughout the trial.
He tried to appeal the sentence on the grounds of his age, but this was rejected as it was deemed that the judge had already taken everything into consideration. One can only wonder what would have happened if Michelle hadn't called the police that day. She said, "People have told me I saved lives, but the truth is I think I saved my own life. I think he was waiting for me to be his third victim."
Obviously I got close enough, so when he looked at me, I looked back at him, felt really, really sort of scared, panicked. I turned around, went back on where I was, and that's when I obviously decided I needed to call the police, but I wasn't 100% certain because I thought, you know, if he hasn't done anything, do I or don't I?
And you could have been just seconds away from...
Yeah, if I'd have gone in 5 minutes later, which is what I already knew, where he was in that bush, I know he'd have got me from behind, and I know that, and yeah, that's the most horrific part, you know, obviously reading that in the statements, what's come out in court. Yeah, I'm just very, very lucky to be here. Yeah.
The community was saddened when Michelle, who had been the one to report and catch him, was not allowed any of the reward money because she had phoned the police first and not the anonymous number. Residents put some money in for her to show their gratitude. Many experts say that a serial killer in the making was stopped that day. James himself said he wanted to kill again. He told police if he hadn't been caught, he would have killed at least 15 more people. The investigating team said Jim and Nahid's cases will be forever ingrained in their minds. Jim had spent 4 years rebuilding his life and was the definition of someone that never gave up, even when faced with challenges that could so easily pull someone into a really dark place. Nahid loved her university, was making great friends, and couldn't wait to graduate and really start the rest of her life. Their lives were snatched away in the most horrifying of circumstances, but their families hope that everyone will always remember them for the incredibly motivated, strong, and kind people they were. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it.